you have the be forever young or be invisible, or then you have the weird ass kind of 1950s, if you are an acceptable older woman, the way you look is like grandma with the cookies. I mean, like, it's, the scent of chocolate chip cookies sort of wafts off you every time you move.
Welcome to the Unquiet Sisterhood, a place where we can talk about real life, work, love, and more from a feminist perspective. I'm Jen Pavich, your host, and now let's dive right in. Welcome to episode 9 of the Unquiet Sisterhood podcast. Today I'm talking with my dear friend and a woman of many talents, Tracie Nichols. Tracie is a business coach, an aromatherapist, a poet, and a Rebel Crone. She's also the founder of TracieNichols.com, Essential Now, and Rebel Crone Rising. And today we're going to talk about aging, what our culture teaches us about getting older, and what it means to be a Rebel Crone. All right, let's get started. Tracie, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
I am so jazzed to be here. I love your podcast.
So jazzed to have you here. So, let's talk a little bit about what it means. I know a lot of the work that you do is around being a highly sensitive person or an HSP. So tell me a little bit about what that means and kind of how would someone know if they were an HSP?
Okay, so being an HSP or a highly sensitive person it's a neurologic trait that was identified and is being researched by a woman named Elaine Aron. And this trait, when I say neurologic trait, I mean it's something you don't choose. It's there. It's like, hardwired into you. And it shows up in 15 to 20% of the population. And fascinatingly, this is where I kind of nerd out a little on my science stuff. What I love about it is it shows up in 15 to 20% of all life forms they've examined so far, like animal life.
Wow.
So, yeah. So what's really cool is it then that speaks to HSP being an evolutionary trait. Like there's a reason that it exists in the species. It happens for a reason. And one of the other things that is important to know about being HSP, because the name highly sensitive person tends to lead people to think that it kind of is talking about introversion or shyness, and that's not true. Shyness is a learned trait. Introversion is basically a personality trait, and 30% of people who are highly sensitive are extroverts. So you can have extroverted HSPs, but oftentimes HSPs will come off as looking introverted because of the high sensitivity. So what does it look like, or how does it feel to be an HSP, and how do you know if you're an HSP? One of the easiest ways to know is to go to Elaine Aron's website, which is hsperson.com, and she's got some self-assessments there that you can take. I will say that Elaine is a researcher, and so she's looking for people who are, fully manifesting all of the, check all the boxes kind of things. I have found that there are people who check only some of the boxes. And so in that case, you may not be full on HSP, but you do have some highly sensitive qualities. And that's something to kind of filter into what you know about yourself and then into how you're interacting in the world.
So let's back up a little bit and just talk a little bit more about what HSP is. So are we talking, highly sensitive, emotionally, physically, like what does it actually mean?
All of the above. So when you're an HSP, the way that I describe it to the world is, okay, so you're talking about sensory perception. So your senses, sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. And we all kind of monitor these senses. It's how the world speaks to us. And for most of the world, 80% of the world, when, the sensory information comes in, it kind of comes in, you filter through it, and it just kind of passes through and you do what you need to with the information. If you're highly sensitive, that information comes in with an intensity that's almost like, the volume is dialed up to 11 all the time. So you have this unbelievable cascade of sensory information that you feel in your body. you feel it emotionally. HSPs are empathetic to the nth degree. We literally can walk into a room and feel all of the feelings that are going on in that room. So you can easily be overwhelmed. So one of the things about being highly sensitive is the world can overwhelm you with all of the sensory input. And at the same time, the world can be an exquisite experience, because I can walk out into a forest, and what I feel coming from that forest is so multi-layered. It's almost verges on synesthesia, but it doesn't go there. But it just fills me to the point where I am replete, and I lose the sense of where I end and where the forest begins. And that, I think, is one of the most beautiful experiences you can have. And that comes through my being HSP, for sure.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
It's pretty extraordinary. It can also be utterly overwhelming. So as you can imagine, I avoid cities like the plague, because I walk into a city and there's so much movement and sound, and it all bounces off of everything else. And the smells are utterly overwhelming. So most HSPs have one sense that kind of is their kryptonite sense. Mine is the sense of smell. Okay. So it's just, and evolutionarily, what this sense is about is we notice so much. That's kind of the thing. You notice so much and you put together all this information. So we're kind of the canary in a coal mine for the species. We're out there noticing all of the things that are going on and putting together information and saying, wait, alert, kind of like Danger, Will Robinson. Pay attention to this thing, because this is coming at us like a freight train, and most of the rest of the culture hasn't noticed it yet.
Wow.
So
it's like a superpower.
It is absolutely a superpower. So like, if you think of it like giftedness, so you think about somebody who's musically gifted, who can just like create symphonies that are, Mozart created these incredible works of art that just kind of flowed out of him. So HSPs, the superpower is this being tagged so deeply into the world and noticing things so deeply and processing it so deeply that we come up with ideas and insights that almost seem eerily visionary.
Wow, because it's almost like you're getting the information ahead of time, or like kind of getting it because you're so sensitive to it.
Right.
So,
because
did you always know that you were an HSP, or did you always kind of know, like even as a kid, that something was different in the way that you were sort of taking in information?
Yes, I knew, and I did. So I knew there was something weird and different about me. I mean, up until a certain point, when you're little, your normal is your normal, and
you don't realize it's different from anybody else's.
From anybody else. But then, when the world starts giving you feedback, or you go to school, or you talk to your friends, or you like tell your parents about the fact that, it felt like the tree was talking to you or something, and they're like, what? And they quickly are like, no, don't tell people about that. You get the feedback that suddenly, there's something different about you, and it's weird. And most of the time the feedback you get is because HSPs, we're criers, most of us. I cannot not cry if I'm moved, and it's uncontrollable. So I'm the one who cries through like, God, when I worked in corporate America, it was horrible, because I'm the one who's sobbing through like, my annual review. And that in our culture is viewed as something that's, there's something a little wrong with her. She's too emotional, she's too sensitive. And then there are assumptions that kind of, especially for women, that kind of go around that of, she can't handle it. She's,
I was going to say, those sound like all of the things that all women are told anyway,
right. So boost it up, because HSPs, it's really hard to put on that armor so that you can kind of, fake it or pass in the world. And so it took me a long time. I was, gosh, it probably was 15 years ago when somebody introduced me to the idea of high sensitivity. And it took probably 5 years after that. So maybe a decade I've kind of been aware, and it's only been in the past 5 years, and I'm 57. So about the past 5 years that I've really understood that I'm highly sensitive and what exactly that means and how it impacts my world.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's a big realization. So I would
imagine so, because all of that information coming in at such a sensitive level all the time, sounds like it could be a little overwhelming or a
Utterly.
lot overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Overwhelm can be one of the biggest, overwhelm and understanding how to create boundaries, two of the biggest challenges for people who are highly sensitive. Um, yeah, because we also have this deep compulsion to service.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you match that up with somebody who's already kind of boundaryless because the world is penetrating them so deeply, and one of the things we do is we tip over into over serving and burning out really easily.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be kind of a pendulum swing between sort of, just way too much coming in and then needing to almost sort of isolate
Yes.
to like let it
Yes.
seep back out or calm back down.
Yes. So I spend a lot of time in solitude. Both because I'm an introvert, and that's how I recharge, and then also because I'm highly sensitive, so I can just kind of let my nervous system, rest.
Yeah. And you said that, so it sounds like most HSPs are introverts, but not all.
Not all, no,
About a
30%
third,
are
they said?
extroverts.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think the biggest difference is for introverts and extroverts and how they experience HSP?
Well, I think one of the biggest differences I've noticed, because I have a friend who's an extroverted HSP, and so that extroverts need contact with other people. That's how they recharge and regenerate. So being in crowds and being in a social situation, or that's how they kind of build their energy. And yet they're also being overwhelmed by that energy. So there's definitely, they walk a finer line, I think, than introverted HSPs in terms of being able to get what they need as extroverts, so that they don't feel isolated or cut off, but also not having their sensory systems overwhelmed. And so I think that they have a harder time getting all of their needs met. With an introverted HSP, I can just go off in the woods by myself and, I'm good. Leave me there for a few days, I'm a happy woman. So,
yeah, it sounds like there's almost like a tipping point for the extroverts
yeah.
of, okay, this is enough and then this is too much. And you have to sort
Yes.
of know where that
And you
is.
have to know where it is so that you're able to kind of recharge and get yourself, recharge your energy as a human, but then also not overwhelm your system.
Yeah. And that is something that, I think knowing how to recharge your own energy as a human is something that a lot of people struggle with, and especially women.
Yes.
Because, we spend a lot of our time often feeling pressured to manage the experience of other people,
Yes.
and not sort of manage our own experience at all. And one of the things that I've noticed, I think, in the last few years is that I feel like there's a point for women where, and this often happens when maybe the kids are a little older, right around, like for me, it was totally, 40 just a couple of years ago was kind of like the culmination of this, but I think it started more like in my early 30s, where suddenly we start to realize that that's actually important, managing our own experience. Things like self-care and self-kindness, and just coming into our own as humans. I think sometimes, particularly for women who have any kind of caregiving responsibilities, whether it's kids or another family member or that kind of thing, I think we come into that later in life, where we kind of start thinking about those things, which usually means that before that point, we've had a lot of bad experience with not taking care of ourselves very well.
Right. Agreed. Yes.
And speaking of like kind of things that happen as we get older, that kind of brings me to another area that I know that you are kind of on fire about lately and exploring in different ways, which is this whole idea of women getting older and moving into our cronehood. I feel like we have to explain this term a little bit for people that might not be familiar, but womanhood can be looked at through the lens of kind of, stages of life and kind of maiden, mother, crone, the three facets of the goddess, however you want to sort of put that. And what you've been really interested in exploring lately is what happens when we're getting older from a cultural standpoint,
Mhm.
kind of what that looks like. Well, let's start there. So let's talk about women getting older in the world. What have you learned?
Oh my goodness. And I'm gonna have to ask you to repeat that because the recording it froze while you're saying the
Oh,
question.
sorry about that. So like as women get older in the world and in our culture, what does that look like? What are the things that come up maybe unexpectedly or expectedly that are kind of, surprising?
Wow. Um, so I think the first thing that comes up, and I'm just going to draw on my own experience here because that's I mean that's what I can speak from best. I right now, like I said, I'm 57. I have my hair is silver, and I never really colored it. So I made the choice mostly out of annoyance with hair coloring processes and the time it took because I just never could keep it up. Um, but I made the choice to let myself go gray. And the responses were fascinating to that. I remember about 10 years ago, I was at a farmer's market and a woman came up to me and she looked at me and she was probably the same age I was. And she said, "I love your hair. It's so courageous what you're doing." And I paused a moment, thanked her, and at the same time had this kind of mixed reaction going on, thinking, I have my natural color hair and that's courageous. What the fuck does that say about our culture? There
Yeah.
was a courageous step to not be coloring my hair, like to like, be salt and pepper or
Mhm.
whatever I was at the time. Um, and at the same time, this woman's whole posture was yearning. I mean, she was like, in a conversation, you can tell when someone's kind of leaning into you, and they really like her energy, HSP thing here. I could feel her reaching out and wanting so much to have the courage to do the same thing for herself, to not have to do the hair and the makeup and the color and the all, the whole 9 yards that like kind of like, medieval knights used to like, you'd armor up, and
Yeah.
everything, everything went
The
on.
packaging.
Exactly. And, because you had to go out in the world and brave it and you had to, be strong enough to withstand what it was going to throw at you. And it felt to me like that was the perspective she was coming from. And again, that just, without words, she spoke the whole kind of conundrum of a woman aging in this culture, which is you have to it's this really mixed set of messages. So you either have to look eternally youthful and never admit to aging. So you never admit that maybe your joints hurt a little bit more or you have slightly less energy than you used to. um, or talk about all of the unbelievable things that go on with the hormones and all that kind of stuff. Oh my God. All of that has to stay under wraps, and you still, you have the whole mask goes on, or you're expected to sort of fade into this quiet invisibility because, you don't have the uterus that produces children anymore. So your primary reason for being is gone. And therefore, without the creative potential of the uterus, your brain somehow loses its creative potential, and you can no longer innovate, and you can no longer, and like your usefulness kind of just slides off. So, and husbands go out and find a newer model or something,
And
that
that's such a tightrope, like what you're
yeah,
describing too, because, this idea of, however you want to look at fashion, makeup, etc., like, it can kind of be a couple of different ways through our whole lives, right?
right,
It can be a way that we express ourselves. It can be a way that we, are able to embody looking a certain way that makes us happy, or it can be kind of a tool of oppression. Like it can
right,
be sort of, I am doing this, I'm armoring up, I'm putting this on because I feel like I have to project this image or put on this show.
right.
And then when we get older, it's super interesting to see that tightrope gets even thinner,
Yeah,
because it's not only, there's this expectation that on one hand, we are going to fight the physical signs of aging. We're going to, hide the fact that we're a certain age or that we have gray hair or wrinkles or whatever the case may
right,
be. Like that's all going to be under wraps. But on the other hand, there's this expectation that we are too old to draw attention to our looks in certain ways, and that's somehow not okay anymore.
Right.
So like that tightrope gets super thin, because how often have we heard people comment on, oh, she's too old to be wearing that?
Oh my God, yes. And women, we're some of the worst. I mean, we participate in our own ageist oppression so willingly.
We participate on all our oppression. Like women are
True.
the primary enforcers of the patriarchy.
Right. So, and then, I mean, and to add into the whole ageist thing, you know, you have the be forever young or be invisible, or then you have the weird ass kind of, I don't know, 1950s, if you are an acceptable older woman, the way you look is, you know, is like grandma with the cookies. I mean, like, you know, it's, you know, the scent of chocolate chip cookies sort of wafts off you every time you move, and you're comfortable and you're sweet with your little
always smiling.
You're always smiling and there for everybody, and you would feed the whole world if you could, you know. I mean, and so, and that, I mean, I don't know anybody who's like that, but that's the weird, you know?
And that's not a real thing, right?
No.
Like that's not any more real than expecting women to be like, you know, flipping June Cleaver, right? Like
exactly.
It's just like so not a real thing that actually exists. We have so many stereotypes of women.
Yes.
You know, the tropes that we're supposed to be at the different points of our life.
Yes.
You know,
right.
and it's just so ridiculous. They're all so two-dimensional.
They are incredibly. And so, you know, as you're in the first place, as you're aging, you get a little crazy just trying to pick which one you're supposed to fit into. You know, am I picking the invisible room? Am I picking the, you know, the grandma with cookies room, or am I picking the I'm not aging room? You know, and but the thing is, there is no, you know, option D unless we write it ourselves.
Because all three of those are marginalized in a different way.
Yes, absolutely. And so what I'm discovering now is, you know, I have this, like I said, I'm an introvert. I'm highly sensitive. I've always been a very quiet woman, and I'm an anarchist. So when you say to me, you have to pick this room or this room or this room, my answer is fuck no. And I will, you know, I will quietly in my own way say, no, I'm going to weave this because this makes sense to me, because my body can live in this. And, you know, my brain can live with this. And so, and I think there's a lot of women picking that, but then that leaves you feeling isolated, because then you're kind of picking that place, but people in your community may not be, or, you know, how do you meet other women who are picking that place? And how do you find yourself in conversation with someone who's, you know, who's bucking the same trends, you know, who's trying to move outside the stereotypes.
And I've been watching you have these conversations on social media lately, which have been so fucking phenomenal, can I just say?
Thank you.
You know, like you've been posting some of this amazing stuff about your new program, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. And I was trying to remember what the thing was, because there was something that you posted the other day, and it was about fashion.
Yes. Oh, it was an article I read that was enthusing about, I think it was 10 women who were over 70 who were dressing fashionably, and it was one of those times when my first response was, yay, good for them. And then I kind of did this long, slow burn, and I realized, wait a minute, these women are being pointed out as being remarkable because they're not dressing like old people. And I mean, the article actually said because they're not dressing like old people. And I thought, who the hell's the arbiter of this?
There's so many things wrong with that, right?
There's so many things wrong with it. And that was kind of, I think, what I was pointing out was, you know, there's so many things wrong with this. And do I think these women are remarkable? I think they're remarkable because each one of them had a strong personality that came through in the article, like the individual piece that was written about each of them. But it wasn't her damn clothes. It was the fact that she was a strong woman, being in her power, being who she was, and not taking crap from the world. So, okay, maybe it was her clothing that everybody noticed about her, but that's not what was amazing or remarkable about these women. So that was, that was one of the things I
yes, absolutely. And it sparked like such a great conversation with kind of different people, you know, weighing in. And what I've seen you do a few times lately that I absolutely love is pointing out the everyday ageism.
Yeah.
The stuff that's just there all the time that we almost don't even notice it
Mm-hmm.
until it's kind of pointed out, because it's become such a, I feel like ageism in some ways is like socially acceptable.
It is.
And that's something that we could definitely change, because, and yeah, and ageism goes both ways, right? Like working in the career space.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I spend a lot of time listening to people bitch about millennials
Yeah.
and just kind of like lumping them all together, which, I mean, there's definitely like there's early millennials and late millennials, and frankly, they're not that much alike. They
Right.
really should be split up. And there is benefit to having people of all ages be able to like work together and teach each other different things. It's amazing.
Absolutely. And I think actually that was one of the other posts I did, was where I was talking about, if you're not in the early, if you're not in that kind of tiny middle space of years where everything's just kind of just right, then you're either too young or too old, and, it's, Goldilocks and Three Bears all over again.
And in that microspace, like you don't even know you're in it. Like I don't know where that microspace would be, but
Exactly.
if I've gotten there, I don't know it yet, or I might be through it already.
Who knows? And it's probably, a moving target, because who wants women in particular to know when they're in their power?
Yes,
that
that's true.
Um,
You need to keep that target moving.
Exactly. Keep that target moving.
Not yet. Nope, too late.
Right. Exactly. And one of the things that, this is one of the factoids that I kind of rocked me back deeply when I'm a little nerdy, so I do research things. And I was looking at ageist statistics and research. And one of the things that came out of it was, we internalize our stereotype of what age is supposed to look like at really young ages. So by the time we're about 4 years old, we have internalized what our culture's perceptions around aging are. So we already know exactly. So we grow up with this self-fulfilling prophecy encoded into us. So we get the external, whatever age is supposed to be about. And in this culture, it's, either don't do it or be the funky little cookie smelling grandma. And we have this internal voice that, whatever age it happens to be that was spoken about in our family or in our culture or in our community group, there, when you hit that magic place, then all of a sudden you have to act in these certain ways. So it's almost like it kicks in. And I noticed that in myself. I noticed that at a certain point in time, I started thinking, oh, I'm too old for this shit. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? Where did that come from? But that came out of my grandparents' mouth. I can hear it in their voices.
Wow.
And ideas about what I should wear. I have started asking my daughter to help me pick clothing, because I don't want to start automatically choosing things that make me invisible, or that make me, that I think old women should wear, because I can feel it in me. And she's just like,
so there in your subconscious too.
It is. It's just, it's internalized, completely internalized ageism. So I think pointing those things out, I'm doing it mostly for myself, and then I'm sharing it with the world, because I figure if I'm seeing it, then other people probably want to see it too.
Yep.
And yeah, and I think even you commented on something that I posted. You said something like, it's so insidious. Yes. It totally is.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny when I think about what you just said about kids internalizing this and kind of developing these ideas, or, by around the age of 4,
Mm-hmm.
what just popped into my head was thinking about picture books and fairy tales.
Yes.
And all of the things, when we're really young and looking, thinking about like the picture books that I read to my kids, and kind of, it's interesting because there I feel like older people have this almost magical, mystical role of being these sort of wise characters in fairy tales, or kind of Um, and it's interesting to think about that that's in kind of the culture of our mythology, or like the culture of our, kind of fairy tale or fantasy lore.
Mm-hmm.
And yet in real life, we don't have that same reverence for older people. Like we don't have that same. So it's interesting that the disconnect there between
Mm-hmm.
the kind of really strong archetypal, like sort of
Right.
ideas that we have and the reality.
Right. And then if you, just to complicate things, if you take a look at, the actual stories of, say, the Grimm's fairy tales or something
Mm-hmm.
like that, and then you look at the Disneyized versions of them, and you look at, the strength and the power of the elder women in some of those stories, and
Mm-hmm.
then you look at what the cartoonized version did, they turned them into those little comfy grandmothers, who are
Yeah.
super
Or they're the villain.
right, or they're the villain, right.
Yeah.
Maleficent was definitely a middle-aged woman.
Yes,
She was
for
super
sure.
queen.
Well, and you look at like Cinderella's stepmother, or kind
Oh
of,
yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
um,
You know, so yeah, it's really really interesting to notice stuff like that, and we're imprinting all of this on tiny minds that are just sucking up information and then making meaning with it.
yeah. I think what you said is so important for women to be seen kind of doing something else, something other than those kind of tropes, or whatever. And I almost said women of a certain age, and then I remembered another post that I saw you do the other day, where like you actually like drew my mind to this, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. There isn't really something that we can say that doesn't in our culture have a negative connotation.
Yep.
We can say older or elderly, or like middle age. Like what
Right.
is the term? What should we use? I don't even know. And I love that you're using crone.
Yes. And I think, words get so laden with meaning, and, they carry this whole, giant trunk of cultural assumptions along with them. So aging and older and elderly carry all of these, negative associations with them. And so stumbling on the word crone, and actually Sharon Blackie, who wrote Women Who Rise Rooted, um, put out a newsletter recently where she said she likes the word hag. And I'm like, oh, I like hag too.
Wow.
I know. But again, they have fewer assumptions woven into them already. So we have this opportunity to kind of grab a hold of them and create the assumptions we want associated with them. So, we have the option of saying, as a crone, that means a woman, who is later in her life, who has this full, body of work to draw on, whether it's a body of work that's literally from, work outside the home, or whether it's a body of work that's raising children, or, whatever it happens to be, she has this full raft of experience she can draw on, and she's someone who is standing in the strength of all of this. And then, if you think about analogy I thought of the other day is, if you look at a forest, a lot of times there'll be one big old tree, and a lot of the younger ones are seeds from that tree. And that tree is there not taking resources from everything else, but simultaneously giving. They will often feed resources to weaker trees because it has a deeper reservoir. And so feeding its community and helping it to thrive, while at the same time being held up and fed by the community around it. So that's what a crone is to me. She's kind of like, there she is in the wisdom of all of the years that she has, simultaneously supporting and nourishing her community, and then being nourished by it. So I don't know, to me, that, me, nature, that's my thing. So that
It's a
imagery
beautiful
works for
image.
me. Thanks.
And it is just like the sense of like a woman being able to truly stand in her power, and kind of own it in a different way that I think doesn't happen for us until we get to sort of a certain age.
Yeah, I mean, I know for me, life required my attention to be so deeply focused. And I think a lot of women feel this way. You know, you're
Mhm.
focused on your children in a very different way. And I do have children, so I have three. But even women who are choosing not to raise children, who are, you know, who are working, who are volunteering, who are artists, whatever they're doing, you know, your life requires your attention or asks a certain kind of attention from you. There's an intensity of belief and passion and creation, I think, that happens in your 20s and 30s, that, you know, is that is evolution saying, okay, now's the time. You are procreating, whatever you're procreating now is, you know, is the time when you're doing it. And then you're moving into a different type of attention and energy usage when when you move past that point where you're actively kind of vibrantly, passionately procreating at every moment you can. um, and and so it gives you space. And, you know, you hear older people saying, you know, it brings them perspective. And I think it does. But I think there's also something energetically, and I don't know what it is yet. And I'm still working on identifying some of this, but there's something energetically that has shifted in me deeply. And it started probably about 5 to 7 years ago. And it just means that I focus in different ways, that my focus is broader and deeper, and not necessarily laser focusing on specifics, if that makes any sense.
That makes absolute sense. Yeah.
Okay.
And it
Cool.
really, it's so interesting to think about that because I think you're absolutely right that it's kind of this, whether it's career or kids or art or, when you're building that,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that is, it does take, you have to be sort of all in
Mm-hmm.
on those aspects of your life. And then, hopefully you get to a point where you're able to take a step back and have maybe a little bit more of a passive role in some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And it just opens up so much space for what else.
Yeah. And I hesitate to say that, you know, that you're creating less, or that it's just different. The quality of it is
Mhm.
different. So I would have to say that, I mean, I'm about to embark on creating a pretty substantive body of, you know, addition to my body of work with, you know, with the program that I'm going to be putting out. And it's life has been very kind to me, because when I first happened upon the idea, it presented to me in this very sort of tiny way, and I was like, oh sure, I can do that, you know. And I realized with the first, you know, graphic that I put out that you mentioned before, that one of the lines on there was, you know, the movement begins. And I put it on there again, just kind of because it felt like the right thing to do, and because, you know, I've learned to trust my intuition, so I did it. And I was talking to somebody today, and I was like, kind of like, oh crap, I think I'm starting a movement. So and
Yeah, you know what? When you put that on there, my first thought when I saw it was like, "Oh, yes, it does," because I
yeah,
could just like, you could just see people jumping in to comment and just be so
yeah.
excited. And so let's talk about that movement.
Yeah. So the graphics that you talked about, and the you know, the what I've been calling this is Rebel Crone Rising. And there's the crone word in there because, you know, because I'm speaking to women who are 50ish, is kind of how I'm characterizing this. Some may be younger, some might be older, but, you know, that's kind of the central point, because that's where I felt that shift beginning for myself. And the rebel part, like I said, I'm a quiet anarchist, but I'm an anarchist. and and it really is speaking into that group of women out there who are kind of like, I this is wrong. Like, I can't look this version of being, you know, old in the face. It feels wrong in my body. There's got to be something different. There's got to be something more, you know. Or maybe they're more overt, and they've, you know, they're clear on the fact that patriarchy is bullshit, and they've been working with that, and now they're moving into working with ageism and all of the other isms that are, you know, all the intersections that are happening there. But it really is about, you know, women who are unwilling to buy into whatever the world is telling us we should be as women in this phase of life. And then the rising part is about creating a sense of community so that we don't feel isolated. We're not kind of like out here in our little corner staging our own revolt, but we're coming together and we're having conversations and we're creating a new definition of what being women who are 50-ish, who are on a spiritual journey, who are, and I speak directly to introverts because that's, I think, introversion is also one of those traits that gets really, really stomped on by this culture. Mm-hmm. So, really, that's that, and that's the rise. The rise is, if you're introverted, if you're a 50-ish woman, if you've been on a spiritual journey or you're starting a spiritual journey, and you just know that this isn't right, that the world is telling you or feeding back to you isn't right, then what we're doing is coming together and we're starting to have conversations and we're learning about these things and we're going to rise and look out, world.
Wow. I know, it's magnificent. Like whenever I hear you talk about it, I just have this like mental picture of this like gathering of yes. people, of energy, of kind of just all of the things. And yes. I think it is just really awesome.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I know I'm excited about it because, it's my thing, but it's so amazing to hear people, reflect back to me what they're sensing from it, because, it helps me know that it has meaning. And I think one of the most interesting comments was I'd spoken about the Rebel Crone rise story to someone who is younger than I am. And she said she was out talking to all of her friends about it and they all want to be Rebel Crones when they grow up. And
that's how I feel too.
I was like, that's amazing. And then and the next thing was, that is so sad because women have to aspire to that. It's not what is.
It's something we haven't seen a lot of.
Right.
Yeah, so, I know. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to hear you talk about this, because it is this sort of idea of there being, because I feel like I'm not to my cronehood quite yet, but like, to have something to look toward and aspire to,
right,
as a woman, in my early 40s is something, right? Like we don't necessarily see something other than fading into invisibility or, cartoon grandmahood.
Exactly.
Or doing the never-ending dance of trying to be, younger, or trying
perennially, right. At Forever 21, right. Exactly. And I mean, I think there is a bit of a sea change in the culture, a tiny bit. Like you see some women who are, in their crone years being foregrounded, mm-hmm. but they are mostly actors, mm-hmm. Models. I haven't, other than perhaps Oprah, who's also an actor, but she does at least talk about substantive things. Mm-hmm. Maya Angelou was another woman who, was talking of, speaking about many things of substance. But largely, you're not seeing these really strong older women who are being foregrounded as leaders in government or leaders in business or leaders.
Yeah. So it's more in the cultural entertainment space.
It is.
But at least we're seeing it there. I mean,
right.
And thank you to Helen Mirren and Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin and all of the women that are
right,
kind of coming out and saying like, no, this is actually a thing and it's kind of bullshit.
It is, exactly. So I mean, I think the time is ripe. There's change willing to happen. And I think for me, one of the biggest points of hope is, looking at my daughter's 22. So looking into her generation, and they're so not attached to the isms.
Yes.
And so when I say something about this to her, she's just like, Mom, do it, be who you are. It's what the hell? Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So, if I can create something that helps the women who are already here and the ones who are, making their way to here, then I think we can have, we'll kind of cover the space in between, now and that upcoming generation who I think have kind of broken out of a lot of the expectations. So.
Absolutely. And I think, when you think about things like feminism and overcoming patriarchy, one of the missing elements to all that has been what does that look like in the long run? What does that kind of look like for people that are sort of a little older and I think that that's been missing from the narrative. And it's not for lack of people trying to bring it into
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, because I know when I was in the nonprofit world, like looking at things like public policy, some of the elements that we were looking at when we were looking at economic policy that affected women
Mm-hmm.
was how, women of retirement age or older are affected by financial things. And it's a huge thing.
That's a huge
But
thing.
I will say that was the piece of the conversation that had to be constantly and consciously brought back in so that it didn't just get brushed off the table.
Right. Right. It's fascinating. And I think in this one region in ageism of older people, where you see in a tiny way a bit of a leveling of the patriarchy, because men at a certain point, not as early as women, but at a certain point, men become as invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
you're just kind of writing off everybody above a certain age. Now it's more like 65 to 70 at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But still, you have this writing off of an entire, the upper generation of a culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
But I do think you're right. I think that we are moving in the right direction with some of this stuff. Like I know, well, it's been a while now, but in 2017, Allure magazine banned the term anti-aging.
Wow.
And I was really kind of hoping when that happened that some other businesses might follow suit and kind of jump on that conversation, but I haven't seen quite as much come out of it as I had hoped.
No, there's way too much in that money to be made in that industry. From a very, cynical standpoint. But I think there is movement, and the movement I don't think is going to come from the corporations, even in the nonprofits. It's going to come from.
It's going to come from people.
Yeah, it's going to come from people who
The
are
real
just.
people.
Yeah, exactly. Who are just like, no, this can't be. This can't continue.
Yeah.
And we have a growing number of people who are, going past 60, and so the population will become unwieldy in terms of, if you're trying to write off the entire upper tier, then you're going to lose 60% of your brain power. And
the interesting thing about that is one of the things that we've totally seen in the last 20 years or so is that, there was the whole like 60 is the new 40 thing. But
yes.
What you see with people over 60 that's fascinating is they are, starting businesses. Like there was this whole idea of I want to retire at 55. Like I remember people saying that like when I was a kid.
Right.
And then there were some people that did that and they were like, oh yeah, that's boring.
Right.
I'm ready to go back to work. So now you have these people, kind of in that age range, and they're starting businesses and they're starting nonprofits and they're doing like really amazing things.
Yes.
There's a whole exciting world that I feel like is under communicated.
It is under communicated. And one of the, I don't know if I can get the statistic entirely right, but one of the largest growing groups of people who are starting businesses are women over 50.
I believe it. Yeah. Because I know so many, and it's kind of a totally different place to be when you start a business because you know so much more.
Well, yes and no. You have a lot of life experience, you have a lot of perspective, and hopefully you have more resources, although that's not necessarily the case because so often, women in that age range can be trying to start their lives over after, losing a spouse in some form. but you I think you have more patience in a way, but I think you have to go through all the things that
Oh,
every
yeah.
business owner, the whole personal development growth experience, face your dragons. Just
Yes.
come to the,
Well, and I mean, that's
yeah.
the program that I'm starting right now is all about starting a business and how that
Right.
is just really another fucking growth opportunity, whether you want it to be or not.
Exactly. I'm sorry. I thought I was starting a business. I did not realize that this was therapy.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So, your community, Rebel
Yes.
Crone Rising, will
Mhm.
be up and running in April. Is that about right?
Yeah, there's a whole new website, and then there's the community, and all of it is going to be live by April 5th. So on
That
a
is
new
so
moon.
exciting, and that's
Yeah.
coming right up. So we will make sure to put all of those links in
Okay.
the show notes, along with the HSP assessment and Women Who Rise Rooted.
Mm,
We'll throw those in there as well, so
yeah,
people can take a look at them.
perfect.
Um, awesome. So Tracie, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about this. This was so much fun, and I'm so excited about the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks for having me here.
Yes.
Likewise.
And we'll be sure to have you back again. Thanks.